There's a line on your retirement statement, usually printed near the bottom in the same grey type as your account number, that says cash, or money market, or settlement fund. You have looked at it 100 times and never thought about it once. Vanguard research published in 2024 found that roughly 28% of the people who moved money out of an employer plan into an individual retirement account still had 100% of that money sitting in cash 7 years later. 7 years, not 7 weeks. And when those savers were asked about it, more than half said it was never a decision they made on purpose. They thought the money was invested. The statement said individual retirement account. The money was in an individual retirement account. It simply was not invested in anything at all. That is the biggest retirement mistake I see, and I have been watching it happen for 25 years. It is not exotic. It has nothing to do with picking the wrong fund, or timing the market, or failing to save enough. It is the quiet gap between moving money and investing money. And almost nobody knows the gap exists, because every piece of paperwork you ever signed treated those two things as the same event. Here is the number nobody put on the chart. $100,000 sitting in a cash position, earning about 2% for 7 years, grows to roughly $115,000. The same $100,000 invested in a broad market index fund, earning 7% a year, grows to about $160,000. The gap is roughly $46,000, and I am using 7% deliberately because it is conservative. The long-run nominal return of the broad United States stock market over the last century sits closer to 10% before inflation. I could have used a bigger number and made the gap look worse. I used the smaller one so you cannot accuse me of stacking the deck. I am Pierce, 25 years as an accountant. Corporate tax, small business books, individual returns, audit prep. Somewhere in that stretch I have read through roughly 1,000 retirement plans. And I do not mean I glanced at balances. I mean summary plan descriptions, fund lineups, expense disclosures, the default investment language buried on page 9 of a document nobody in the building has opened since the plan was adopted. I read prospectuses. That is the job. And the single most expensive pattern I found across 1,000 plans was not a bad fund. It was money that had legally arrived in a retirement account and never actually gone to work. I want to tell you about a man I will call David. Not his real name. 62 years old, hospital operations manager, 31 years at the same health system, the kind of client who brings a folder with tabs. He came to me for retirement income planning and he had done nearly everything the way you are supposed to do it. When I pulled his account history and started tracking the money backward, I found something in the middle of it that made me put my pen down. He did not know it was there. Nobody had told him in 9 years. I will come back to David and I will show you the exact dollar figure, because the number is the point of this entire video, and because of what happened in my office when he saw it. First, understand how common this is, because your instinct right now is to assume this is somebody else's problem. In 2023, the retirement account tracking firm Capitalize estimated that there were roughly 29 million forgotten or left behind 401k accounts in the United States, holding approximately $1.65 trillion in assets. 29 million accounts. That is not 29 million careless people. That is 29 million ordinary Americans who changed jobs, got a packet in the mail, dealt with the first 2 pages of it, and moved on with their lives. Against that, look at what people actually have. According to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, the median retirement savings across all American families is about $87,000, and for families headed by someone aged 55 to 64, the median is roughly $185,000. The Employee Benefit Research Institute found in its 2025 survey that only about 28% of American workers are very confident they will be able to retire comfortably. Now put those two facts side by side. Balances are thin, confidence is thinner, and more than $1.5 trillion is sitting in accounts people have stopped thinking about. Your behavior is correct. The system is not. You contributed every pay period. You took the match. You rolled the old account over when you left the job instead of cashing it out, which is already better than most people manage. Every one of those choices was right. The failure happened in a step that nobody ever told you was a separate step. And I am going to prove this with numbers before we are done. Let me walk you through the mechanism exactly, because once you see the gears turn, you will never look at a rollover the same way again. You leave an employer, your old plan sends a check or a wire made out to the custodian holding your new individual retirement account for the benefit of you. That money lands in what the brokerage calls a settlement fund, a core position, or a sweep account. Different firms use different words for the same thing. It is a cash bucket. It is where money waits. At that moment, in the eyes of the tax code, you have completed a perfect rollover. No taxes, no penalty, nothing reportable that hurts you. The transaction is done, and every confirmation you receive will tell you it was successful. Then nothing happens. Because putting that cash into an actual investment requires a second, entirely separate action. Somebody has to place a trade. And here is the piece almost nobody understands. In your old employer plan, there was a default. Under federal auto-enrollment rules, if you never made an investment election, your payroll contributions were funneled into what the Department of Labor calls a qualified default investment alternative, usually a target date fund. A machine invested your money for you because the law told your employer to build that machine. When your money leaves that plan and lands in a retail individual retirement account, that machine does not come with it. There is no default. There is no automatic election. There is nobody at the receiving firm with a legal obligation to invest a single dollar of it. The money sits, correctly and legally, doing almost nothing, indefinitely. And there is an incentive attached, which is where I stop being neutral about this. Brokerage firms earn money on uninvested customer cash. They take your idle balance, hold it in a sweep program, earn a yield on it, pay you a portion, and keep the spread. Cash that sits is a revenue line. It is disclosed, usually in a document that runs about 40 pages, in language written to be technically accurate and practically unreadable. I am not telling you there is a conspiracy. I am telling you that in 25 years, I have never once seen a firm send an urgent letter that says, "We noticed your entire life savings has been in cash since 2019. Please call us." The same leak exists inside employer plans, in a slightly different shape. If you were hired before auto-enrollment became standard, your plan's default might have been a stable value fund or a money market fund, and if you never changed it, that is still where your money is today. I have seen 30-year employees with six-figure balances sitting in a capital preservation option chosen for them by a form they filled out on their first day, before the smartphone existed. I have also seen the quieter version, where somebody updated the election for future contributions and left the existing balance untouched, so half the account is invested and the older, larger half is not. Then there is the third leak, and this one hides even inside accounts that look perfectly healthy. Dividends and capital gains distributions. If automatic reinvestment is switched off, and it is switched off more often than you would believe, every distribution your funds pay drops into that same cash line and stays there. A little in March, a little in June. Year after year, the account is invested. The account's own earnings are not. Now add inflation, because cash does not sit still, it shrinks. The Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that consumer prices rose about 4.2% over the 12 months ending in May of 2026. If your idle cash is earning 4% and prices are climbing 4.2%, your purchasing power is going backward every single day the account is open. Safety that does not beat inflation is not safety. It is slow wealth destruction. And it is the most polite kind of loss there is, because your balance never goes down. The number on the statement stays flat or drifts gently upward, and you feel fine, while the retirement that number was supposed to buy gets more expensive every year. Put a real scale on this. In 2026, the Internal Revenue Service allows an employee to contribute $24,500 to a 401k. That $46,000 gap I showed you at the start, from one single account sitting in cash for 7 years, is nearly 2 full years of maximum contributions erased. Not by a crash, not by a fee, by a trade that was never placed. So what is the mistake 90% of people are actually making? It is not what you think it is, and the answer is not the one the financial industry has been feeding you for 30 years. Before I show you David's number, I need to give you one image and then one comparison that together explain why this happens to careful people and not careless ones. Picture a farmer at the end of winter. He does everything right. He works the extra shift to afford good seed. He buys the best seed available, more than his neighbors buy, and he carries every sack of it into the barn himself. The barn is dry. The roof does not leak. The seed is safe. Nothing can get to it. And every morning through the spring, he walks past that barn and feels the specific satisfaction of a man who prepared, because the sacks are stacked exactly where he put them, and not one grain has been lost. Summer comes, and his neighbor's fields are green and his are bare. Not because he was lazy, not because he bought the wrong seed, not because the weather turned against him, because seed in a sack is not a crop. Seed only becomes a crop in contact with soil, and the barn, the safe, dry, well-built barn he was so proud of, was never the place where growth happens. It was only the place where seed waits. He did the hard part. He skipped the part that takes 10 minutes. That is your retirement account. The account is the barn. The tax shelter is the roof. The contributions are the seed you bought with hours of your life. And the market, ordinary boring participation in the market, is the soil. A 401k is not an investment. An individual retirement account is not an investment. They are containers with tax rules attached. The growth you are counting on comes from what the money is standing in, not from what the money is standing inside of. Now let me show you the math, because I told you I would prove this with numbers, and I want to change only one variable so there is nothing to argue about. Two people, both 52 years old, both leaving a job after a long run, both rolling over $185,000, which is not a number I invented. It is the median retirement savings for American families headed by someone aged 55 to 64, according to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances. Call the first one Susan. Call the second one Raymond. Same amount, same brokerage, same low-cost total stock market index fund available to both of them. Same market conditions, because they lived through identical years. Susan rolls the money over, and 4 days later, when the deposit clears, she logs in and places one trade. Roughly 11 minutes of her life. Raymond rolls the money over. The confirmation letter arrives and says his transfer was completed successfully. He files it. He means to log in that weekend. His mother has a fall. Then it is tax season. Then it is the following spring, and every quarterly statement that arrives shows a balance that is slightly higher than the last one. Because cash pays something, so nothing ever looks broken. 6 years pass before he places the trade. At age 67, using a 7% annual return, which I am choosing on purpose because it is below the roughly 10% long-run, nominal average of the broad United States stock market over the last century, Susan has approximately $510,000. Raymond, whose money earned about 2% for 6 years before it went into the identical fund, has approximately $383,000. The difference is about $127,000. Same starting balance, same fund, same decades, same discipline. And I want to be precise about that word, because Raymond was not undisciplined. He saved that $185,000 the hard way, one pay period at a time, for 25 years. The entire gap between those two outcomes is 6 years of soil contact and a trade that takes 11 minutes. If you are over 50, this is the version of the problem that costs the most, because you have the largest balance you have ever had and the fewest years left to recover from anything. A 28-year-old with $9,000 idle for 6 years loses a few $1,000s of future value. A 56-year-old with $400,000 idle for 6 years loses a number with 6 digits in it. And people over 50 face this in silence, because at that age the embarrassment of asking a basic question about your own money feels worse than not knowing the answer. So the question never gets asked, and the account goes right on sitting there. So here is the turn, and I need you to actually hear this one, because it is the reason I made this video instead of another video about contribution rates. The real problem is not what you think it is. You have been told by every article and every advisor and every retirement calculator you have ever used that your outcome is determined by three things: how much you save, when you started, which funds you picked. So when the number on your statement feels too small, you reach for one of those three explanations, and every one of them points back at you. I should have saved more. I started too late. I picked wrong. None of those is what happened to Raymond. Raymond's savings rate was fine. Raymond's start date was fine. Raymond's fund choice was excellent when he finally made it. What cost him $127,000 was time in which his money existed inside a retirement account without being exposed to the thing that makes retirement accounts work. There is no personality trait that fixes that. There is no amount of willpower that places a trade you do not know needs placing. This is not a discipline problem. It is a math problem. And math problems have the enormous advantage of being solvable in an afternoon by anyone who knows the problem exists. Which brings me to the part that still makes me angry after 25 years. The financial services industry knew this and said nothing. Not in a smoke-filled room way, in a much more ordinary and much more effective way. The entire public conversation about retirement money has been aimed at two questions. Should you use active management or index funds? And how much are you paying in fees? Those are real questions, and I have made whole videos about them. The S&P Dow Jones Indices SPIVA Scorecard, which is the industry's own report card, found that over the 20-year period from 2005 through 2024, 94.1% of all domestic funds underperformed the S&P Composite 1500, and that over the 15-year period ending in December of 2024, not one of the 22 United States equity fund categories had a majority of active managers beating their benchmark. 0 out of 22. That data is public, and it is correct, and it matters, but every one of those debates assumes a fact not in evidence. All of them assume the money is invested. The choice between a fund charging 1% and a fund charging 0.03% is meaningless to a person whose balance is sitting in a settlement account. And nobody in this industry has an advertising budget aimed at that person because there is no product to sell them. There is only a trade to place, and nobody earns anything when you place it. Meanwhile, look at where the industry's actual effort goes. Firms compete ferociously for rollover dollars, with concierge phone lines and transfer bonuses and marketing built entirely around the moment of transfer. The Government Accountability Office reported years ago that plan providers' call center representatives frequently encourage departing workers to move their money into that provider's own individual retirement account, sometimes with incomplete information about the alternatives. The help is real, and it is intense, and it stops the instant the money arrives. That is the tell. The industry's attention ends exactly where your investment was supposed to begin, because uninvested cash sitting in a sweep account is not a failure from the firm's side of the ledger. It is a revenue line. Nobody lied to you. They simply did not send the second letter. Now I owe you David's number. David rolled over $310,000 in 2017 after his health system restructured and his pension plan was frozen. He did it correctly. Direct rollover, no check in his hands, no withholding, no penalty, everything clean. He got the confirmation. He put it in the folder with the tabs, and he told me, when we finally got to it, that he assumed the money kept doing what it had always been doing, because it was the same money and it was still in a retirement account. It sat in a money market position for 9 years. When he walked into my office at 62, that account held roughly $354,000. At 7%, that same $310,000 in the ordinary broad market index fund he already believed he owned would have been worth about $570,000. The gap was roughly $216,000, and I want to be honest with you, 7% understates it because the actual market of those particular years ran hotter than that. I showed him the conservative version. He read the two numbers. He did not say anything. Not for a long time. Long enough that I started to feel like an intruder in my own office. Then this 62-year-old man who had worked 31 years in hospital operations, who had never missed a contribution, who had done the responsible thing at every single fork in the road, put his hand over his eyes and cried at my conference table. He was not ruined. I want to be clear about that. He was going to be all right. He cried because in 9 years, across 2 account statements a quarter, 36 pieces of paper, a plan provider, a receiving brokerage, and an employer benefits department, not one person had ever shown him the math. The information was sitting on his own statement the entire time, printed in grey, on a line he had learned to look past. The window between when something is visible to those paying attention and when it becomes obvious to everyone is where generational wealth is built or lost. David's window was 9 years long, and it closed quietly. Yours is open right now, and the next 20 minutes of this video are about exactly how to check, what to do, and what it costs you for every additional year you wait. So let me give you the 3 moves, and I am going to keep every one of them small enough that you can finish all 3 tonight without calling anybody or paying anybody. Move 1. Find the cash, not conceptually, literally. Log into every retirement account you have, and I mean every one, including the plan from the job you left in 2014 that you have not thought about since. Look for the line labelled cash, core position, settlement fund, money market, or capital preservation. Write down the dollar figure next to each one. If you cannot remember where an old account went, the Department of Labor launched the Retirement Savings Lost and Found database, a free federal search tool built under the Secure 2.0 law. And your old W-2 forms will tell you which employers ever had money withheld for a plan. Give this 20 minutes. Move 2. Put the money in the soil. Inside almost every 401k, there is at least one broad market index option, and in an individual retirement account, you can buy whatever you want. As a real-world reference point, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund charges an expense ratio of about 0.03%, which is roughly $30 a year on a $100,000 position. That is the cost of participation. One trade, not a strategy, not a forecast, not a call about where the market goes next. Just moving the seed out of the sack. And a rule that matters here, especially if you are over 50 and closer to needing the money, your emergency fund belongs in a high-yield savings account outside your retirement accounts, where it earns around 4% and stays liquid. Cash for emergencies is a tool. Cash sitting inside a tax-advantaged retirement account for 9 years by accident is not a tool, it is a leak. Move 3. Turn on automatic dividend reinvestment on every position in every account. It is usually one toggle. It costs nothing. It takes about a minute per account, and it closes the drip that refills the cash line quietly for the rest of your life. Now let me close the loop on the people in this video, because I think the contrast is the whole lesson. Susan placed one trade 11 minutes after her deposit cleared and ended up at 7%, with about $510,000 at 67. Raymond did the identical thing 6 years later and ended with about $383,000. Neither of them ever looked at a chart, timed anything, or made a prediction. And David, when he finally understood what he was looking at, did not spend the next month grieving $216,000. He placed the trade that afternoon, from his phone, sitting in my parking lot. His $354,000, invested at 7%, becomes roughly $694,000 by the time he is 72. Left in the money market position, it would have been closer to $430,000. The 9 years he lost were real, and they are gone. The 10 years in front of him were worth about $260,000, and they were still available at 62 on a Tuesday in under a quarter of an hour. Here is the number that changes everything, and it is the cost of one more year of doing nothing. Take $250,000 sitting idle. Cash pays about 4% right now. Invested at 7%, that same money earns roughly $7,500 more over the next 12 months. Small, easy to shrug at, but that $7,500 is not a one-time difference. It is a permanent shortfall in the base, and it compounds for as long as the account exists. Carry it forward 10 years at 7%, and 1 year of waiting costs you approximately $14,700. 2 years of waiting costs roughly $30,000. That is the price of the sentence I will get to it this weekend. And the inflation piece makes it worse because your idle cash is not standing still. It is walking backward. The Bureau of Labor Statistics put consumer price growth at about 4.2% over the 12 months ending in May of 2026. Cash paying 4% against prices rising 4.2% is a slow, silent, perfectly polite loss. Safety that does not beat inflation is not safety. It is slow wealth destruction. And people wait anyway, because they are waiting to feel sure, and certainty never arrives before the price does. It arrives afterward, in a conference room, with an accountant showing you two numbers. So here is the protocol. I call it SOW, spelled S-O-W, because the whole point of this video is that seed only counts once it is in the ground. 3 components, and I am giving you the exact time and the exact dollars for each one. S is for sweep. 20 minutes, once. Every retirement account you have ever owned, listed on one page, with the cash balance written next to it. Old 401k plans, current 401k, traditional individual retirement account, Roth individual retirement account, that rollover account from 2019. A spouse's accounts too. You are looking for one thing, dollars sitting in a cash or money market position that you believed were invested. Most people who do this honestly find something. The average is not zero, and if your total across all accounts is above $10,000 in unintended cash, you have found a leak worth more than a year of contributions over a 20-year horizon. O is for occupy. 11 minutes, once per account. Place the trade. Move the cash into the broad low-cost index option you already chose at an expense ratio in the neighborhood of 0.03%, roughly $30 a year per $100,000 invested. If it is a 401k, you must change 2 separate settings: the investment election for future contributions and the reallocation of the existing balance. Changing one does not change the other, and the second one is the one people skip. In an individual retirement account, it is one order ticket. W is for wall. 10 minutes once, and then 10 minutes every October. Build the barrier that stops it from happening again. Turn on automatic dividend and capital gains reinvestment on every position. Set your contributions to auto-invest rather than land in cash. In 2026, the Internal Revenue Service lets you put $24,500 into a 401k, $32,500 if you are 50 or older, and up to $35,750 if you happen to be between 60 and 63 under the Super Catch-Up provision, plus $7,500 in an individual retirement account, or $8,600 if you are 50 or older. Every one of those dollars should land in an investment, not in a waiting room. Then put one recurring reminder in your calendar for every October to run the sweep again. 20 minutes plus 11 minutes plus 10 minutes, under an hour total, to close a leak that cost David $216,000. Now the mistake that invalidates the entire protocol, and this is the one almost nobody catches because it is not a mistake of action, it is a mistake of assuming you are done. You run the sweep, you find the cash, you place the trade. The account is now fully invested and you feel finished. But if automatic dividend reinvestment is switched off, and at many custodians it is off by default unless somebody turned it on, then every dividend and every capital gains distribution your funds pay from this day forward drops right back into that same cash line. A little in March, a little in June, September, December, on a $500,000 portfolio yielding around 1.5%. That is roughly $7,500 a year, quietly pooling in the exact position you just emptied. 5 years later, you have a 5-figure cash balance you never noticed accumulating, in an account you are certain you fixed. That is the invisible villain in this whole story, doing what it always does. Not fraud, not a fee, not a bad fund. A default setting that nobody is required to tell you about, running in a direction that costs you money and earns somebody else a little, forever, until you go and change it yourself. If you are going to run the SOW protocol on your own accounts this week, and I mean actually logging in, actually finding the cash line, actually placing the trade, comment zone below so I can see who moved and who is still standing in the barn. And subscribe, because that is what tells the platform to keep showing this kind of analysis to people who need it. And it is the only reason I can keep spending my evenings reading plan documents, so you do not have to. Next week, I am taking this same leak to the other side of the retirement line. What happens to uninvested cash once you stop contributing and start withdrawing? Which account you should empty first? And why the order you sell in can be worth more than the funds you chose. One last thing, and I mean it. This is educational content built on publicly available data from the Federal Reserve, the Internal Revenue Service, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, S&P Dow Jones Indices, and published industry research. It is not personalized financial advice. Every financial situation is different, and the details that make yours different, your income, your state, your tax bracket, your timeline, your spouse, your health, actually matter to the answer. Before you make investment, tax, or retirement decisions, sit down with a licensed professional who can review the specifics of your circumstances. The math I showed you is real. What it means for you is a conversation you should have with somebody who can see your whole picture.